Hey, Algebra 1A kids, Mr. Hayward here. We're doing the notes video for 5.2. Don't forget to follow along. You can pause at any point. If you need extra time, you can rewind, rewatch it, whatever. Quick note, I noticed way too late that last week when I was doing 5.1, I actually skipped the entire last page, 13 through 18. Sorry, not on purpose, but that just gives you extra practice if you want it. Did make the video a little shorter, so I hope you don't mind. All right, so last week we were talking about solving a system by graphing. Just to recap, a system, meaning two different equations, you graphed it, you see where they touch. Now, there are two or three, technically three other ways, but one of them is just using a calculator. So two other main ways to solve a system of equations other than graphing, and we're going to look at the second one today. So 5.2 says solving by substitution. Substitution. Now, usually when we do this in class, the first thing I talk about is the word substitution and where you see that in real life. And I usually get people say, like sports, when you can sub out, and that's when one player comes off and another player comes on. Or in cooking, when you substitute in something that you don't have. If you forgot that you don't have eggs in the kitchen, you can do a substitute. If you forgot you don't have whatever. And then the biggest one, since we are all either students or teachers, is we think of substitute teachers. So that's the analogy that I'm going to use today. So as we go along, keep that in mind, and we're going to go with number one. Now, hold up. There we go. Let's say I give you this problem. You look and you see the top one's written in standard form, the bottom's written in slope-intercept form, and I say solve it. Let's say I didn't even put in the instructions solve by substitution. So now, the only way you've learned thus far is solving by graphing. Here's the sucky part. A, you've got to get graph paper. If you're sitting at home, I doubt too many of you have graph paper just kind of hanging out at home. But then B, I know this one's not going to be easy to graph because I have to put it in slope-intercept form. And just for fun, if you did put this in slope-intercept form, see, it would say y equals -7 over 4x, let's see, what was that last one, minus 9/4. So that's what that would look like in slope-intercept form. And then you'd have to graph that. What the poop? That would suck and is not going to be easy. So let me teach you a second way that's called substitution. Now, I'm going to do some weird stuff. Just want you to follow along with me. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for a variable, aka in this case an x or a y, a variable by itself, meaning it's by itself. There's nothing else on that side of the equal sign. So for instance, in this bottom equation, on the left side of the equal sign is only y. Now I'm going to call that my teacher. I'm going to put a little t so I don't forget. Now, in theory, a teacher and a substitute should be equal in power, authority, good looks. Okay, maybe not the last one, but they should be equal. So if that's my teacher, the substitute is everything on the other side because they're equal. So teacher, sub. Okay? Weird, right? It's all right. Just bear with me. Now, I am going to rewrite this other equation. -7x minus 4y equals 9. Notice something. I took out y. In this case, y was my teacher. I took out my teacher. Hey, if you take out your teacher, who shows up to school? Oh, the sub. Okay? So let's put the sub in place. Now, technically, I haven't changed anything because the teacher and the sub are equal. So if I take one out and I put in the other, I should not have changed anything. I shouldn't have made that side bigger or smaller, whatever. Now look at this. This is a multi-step equation that we can solve. These we used to do at the beginning of the year, which started off by getting rid of parentheses, -4x plus 20. And if you need to take a second and pause and do this a little slower than I'm going to do it, that's totally fine. But this stuff we've done. Next step would be combining like terms. So negative 7x and negative 4x make negative 11x. Next step would be collecting variables, but they're all on the left-hand side, so we're good. Now this is a two-step equation. I would subtract 20, I get negative 11x equals negative 11. And when I divide by negative 11, I get that x equals 1. Woo! Wait. When we solved these before, I'm going to bring back this problem, my answer was a point that had an x and a y. So why am I right now just getting an x equals 1 as my answer? Well, I will tell you that is half of your answer. You need to figure out the other half, which actually takes almost no time at all. Remember this equation that said y equals x minus 5? Well, you know what x is now, so y should just equal, I'm going to take this 1 that I just found and plug it back in. 1 minus 5. Y equals negative 4. Hey, look. Done. Now, if you had graphed it, even though this sucked, if you had graphed it correctly, they still would have crossed at 1 comma negative 4. All right, now, just to help you out, I'm going to write 3 steps down. I'm going to break it down. Everything we just did, I'm going to break it down into 3 different steps. The first step is going to be pretty simple. First step is to find your teacher. Find your teacher. Now, when I say teacher, I mean an x or y by itself. Okay? So remember, we found a y by itself on the left-hand side of the equal sign. Okay? So find your teacher. Step 2. Well, what did we do next? We plugged the substitute into the other equation. So, I guess I should say find teacher slash sub. We're mainly talking about the teacher here, though. Sorry, find teacher slash sub. The teacher is an x or a y. So, plug in substitute for teacher. And I'm also going to note that this is in the other equation. So here's what I mean. I found the teacher and sub in the bottom equation. I plugged them back in the top equation. I didn't go back and plug it into the bottom equation again. All right, what do we do after that? We solved. So plug it in, I guess I should say, and solve there. Okay, so we plugged it in and solved. And that gave us one variable. Then my last step is, let's write this out. Take that variable, which is more often than not an x. You usually find things that say y equals a lot more often than you find things that say x equals. But you take that variable and plug it back in to find the other variable. A little wordy, but I think you got it. Take that variable, plug it back in to find the other variable. That's usually the quickest part. That's what we did right here. Y equals x minus 5. I plugged it in. That took us what? 3 seconds? I don't know. All right, so let's take these steps and let's look at number 3. Remember, I'm just doing the odds. Step 1, find your teacher slash sub. And please write those down. Go back to that part in the video, pause it, write those down. Hey, look, I've got a y by itself. That's my teacher. Everything on the other side is my sub. Notice I circle and I write a little t and s. You don't have to. It just helps me. All right, now it says plug in the substitute for the teacher and solve. So I'm going to look at my other equation. I am going to rewrite it, negative 4x minus 2y equals 3. But I took out my teacher. My teacher was y, so I rewrote that equation. It looks identical except for no y. And then I plug in my sub. and we solve. First says get rid of parentheses. Negative 2 times negative 2x is a positive 4x. Negative 2 times 1 is minus 2. We haven't done anything with the rest of this stuff. All right, then we combine like terms. Negative 4x and 4x. Oh, shoot, those go away. Now I'm left with negative 2 equals 3. Oh, does that look familiar? It should. If you're trying to solve and you find yourself left with a false statement, that means your answer is no solution. This is just like in the last video when we looked at, let me find one, like number 10. This was in your practice where you looked at two lines and they were parallel. If I were to graph these two lines here, they would actually be parallel, and they don't touch at all. Now notice my answer is not parallel, my answer is no solution. Hey, nice, less work for us. All right, let's keep going. Let's look all the way down at number 5. Now I will tell you number 5, we actually get an answer here, so we can do all 3 steps. So same thing, teacher, sub. I'm going to rewrite my second equation without my teacher, and I'm going to plug in my sub. And then I solve. This is a multi-step equation. I still have the 4 steps for solving this hung up in my room, even though you're not there. Negative 2x. Negative 2 times negative 11 is a positive 22. Then I combine like terms, which is these two. I don't have to collect variables because they're all on the left-hand side, which happens a lot. And I'm left with a 2-step equation. So when I subtract 22, I get negative 3x equals negative 12. I divide by negative 3, and I get that half of my equation is that x equals 4. Now I'm going to do myself a favor. Right now, I'm going to write a set of parentheses, and I'm going to write the 4 under the x portion, because this is going to be my answer. Okay, now I've got to take 4, and I've got to follow my last step. My last step said, take that variable, plug it back in to find the other variable. Now, you can do it in whichever one of these equations you want. I don't care where you plug it back in, but the teacher sub-equation is almost always easier. So y equals x minus 11. Except for we just figured out what x is. X is 4. Anybody know what 4 minus 11 is? Negative 7. Done. Now, if you just leave the answer as x equals 4 and y equals a negative 7, you're not technically right. You actually have to go back and write them as a point. So, there are the 3 steps. Found my teacher and sub. I plugged the substitute into the other equation and solved, and then plugged that back in and solved again. 2 different pieces. All right, let's keep going. Number 7. Same process. So find my teacher, find my sub. I'm going to go to the other equation, and I'm going to take out my teacher, negative 21x minus 3. Oh, that's my teacher. And instead of my teacher, I'm going to plug in my sub. And this gives me a multi-step equation. Get rid of parentheses. Negative 3 times negative 7x is a positive 21x. Negative 3 times 5 is a negative 15. I haven't done anything with the equals to or the negative 21x. If you're really observant, you already notice it. Negative 21x and 21x actually cancel out, and I'm left with this. Is that a true statement or not? No. Not a true statement means no solution. That actually saves us some time. We didn't need to even finish solving it. No solution, I'm done. Okay. Now let's look at number 9. y equals negative 3x minus 6. Hey, look, there's my teacher. Here's my substitute. Now I'm going to take my other equation, 9x plus 3y equals negative 18. Notice instead of y, I put a set of parentheses. I typically get asked, do you have to put parentheses? And I'm just going to tell you yes. Technically, you don't have to every time, but usually you do, and it's never going to hurt. So just always put parentheses. Now, instead of that, teacher, I'm going to plug in my sub. This gives us a bunch of practice in solving multi-step equations as well, and I know that is what you all have been missing most during this quarantine. All right, get rid of parentheses. 3 times negative 3x is a negative 9x. 3 times negative 6 is a negative 18. I haven't done anything with this 9x or this negative 18. Oh, you might notice it already. 9x minus 9x goes away. Oh, sweet. This is going to be no solution again. Right? Right? Wrong. Negative 18 equals negative 18. That's not no solution because that's not a false statement. It's also not, what did we call it last time? We said all real numbers. That is technically wrong. So if you write all real numbers, you are wrong. And this little r thing is also wrong. The answer here is actually an infinite amount of solutions. And we did one like this when we were graphing. I'll find it. I'm going to show you. Yeah, it was this one. When we were graphing, we found that when I graphed the two lines, they laid right on top of each other. Now, here's why I say infinite amount of solutions as opposed to all real numbers. Because if you say all real numbers, that means I could take any point, like this one, and say, yeah, that's a solution, which is wrong. Now, I do have an infinite amount of solutions, but they're all in a line. So not everything's a solution, but there are an infinite amount of solutions. So you would need to write infinite amount of solutions. Okay, so you've seen the two special cases, infinite amount of solutions and no solutions. Spoiler alert, the last two actually get answers. They are not special cases. So we'll finish up these last two by following those 3 steps, and then we'll be good. So just like before, find your teacher, find your sub. You might notice sometimes the top equation has the teacher and the sub, sometimes the bottom equation has the teacher and the sub. There's no rhyme or reason of whether it's going to be on top or bottom. You just have to look for the place where the y is by itself. Sometimes it's an x, but rarely. All right, I'm going to rewrite my other equation, the top one, without my teacher. And I'm going to plug in my substitute, which in this case was negative 2x plus 16. Then you solve. 4 times negative 2x is negative 8x. 4 times 16 is 50... Nope. I don't have a calculator here. Sorry. 64. There we go. We nailed it. I haven't done anything with the negative 14 or anything with the negative 5x. Then I combine like terms. Negative 5x, negative 8x makes negative 13x. We keep going. When I subtract 64 from both sides, I get negative 13x equals negative 78. Gee dang it. Slightly large numbers, but I'm sure you have a calculator. Divide by negative 13, and I get that x equals 6. Now, if you stop there, I'm going to be so sad because you're halfway there. Oh, halfway there. Stop it. Okay, sorry. That is the x portion of the answer, but you need to figure out the y portion, which you don't know yet. But I can take the teacher sub equation, and this one's going to be a little bit more fun, and say, hey, I already know what x is, so I can plug in x and solve. Now, this is not going to take 3 seconds like the other ones because I've got to multiply first. Negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. Negative 12 plus 16 is 4. All right, so it took us like 7 seconds. Still not bad. My answer here being 6, 4. Remember, if I'm going a little fast for you, this is a video. You can always pause it, write stuff down, rewind it, so I'll give the explanation again. It'll be exactly the same. You can laugh at those jokes again. Probably not. Or we could just go to number 13. This is the last one. So same 3 steps. Step 1, find your teacher sub. Teacher sub, because this is the y by itself. I'm going to rewrite the other equation minus my teacher, and I'm going to put in my sub. Okay, notice here, I don't have a number in front, so don't be tricked. There is an invisible 1, and that's going to help when we're solving this. Negative 1 times negative 7x is positive 7x. Negative 1 times a negative 13. Sorry, that's not very clear. But negative 1 times a negative 13 is a positive 13. I haven't done anything with the 4x or the minus 20. 4x and 7x make 11x when I combine like terms. I haven't done anything with the 13 or the negative 20. And now I'm at a 2-step equation. If I subtract 13, I get 11x equals a negative 33. Out of room here. Then I divide by 11, and I get that x equals negative 3. Sorry, that's kind of squished at the bottom there, but I think you can see it. Negative 3. Now remember, that is only half my answer. But just for my own good, I'm going to box it and write half my answer right now, so don't forget, this is a reminder to go back and write it as a point. But I'm going to take my teacher sub equation, which said y equals negative 7x minus 13, but I just figured out what x is. X, in this case, is negative 3, so I'm going to plug that in and then just simplify the right-hand side. Negative 7 times negative 3 is 21. 21 minus 13 is 8. That's the other half of my answer. There it is. So recap, this is how you can solve a system of equations without graphing. It's called substitution. First, you find your teacher or sub. That's where I circled this up here. And I wrote a T and an S. I recommend you do the same. 2, I'm going to plug in the substitute. I'm going to take out the teacher, plug in the sub, and then solve. That was right here. I took out the teacher, plugged in the sub, and then solved. And then lastly, once you have one variable, you're going to plug it back in to find the other. That's what I did right here. All right, so you've got some practice problems to do. Make sure I didn't forget a page this time. Sweet. Got some practice problems to do, all the evens up through 14. Don't forget about your 2 special cases. Infinite amount of solutions if you end with a true statement. No solution if you end with a false statement. All right, people. Good luck. Have fun.